Europe didn't just fall into war. It was pushed, pulled, and dragged into disaster. Two of the greatest powers on Earth believed they could master history, but in the end, history devoured them. If you want to understand the world we live in today, you have to witness the choices that destroyed the world of yesterday. When the 20th century dawned, Europe saw itself marching into a golden age. It was an era of incredible science, sprawling empires, unstoppable progress, and what many believed would be permanent peace. But just beneath that glittering surface, a storm was brewing. This storm was driven by rivalries, ambitions, and fears so deep that even the most powerful empires on the planet could not escape them. And at the heart of this gathering, thunder stood to giants, Great Britain and Germany. This isn't just the story of a war. It's the story of how nations, blinded by their own pride and certainty, walked themselves, step by step, into a catastrophe. Understanding that fatal journey is the only way to understand the world as we know it today. To truly grasp how Europe tumbled into the deadliest war in human history, we have to start long before the first shot was fired. Years before the trenches, the barbed wire, and the millions of lives lost. The seeds of that destruction were planted decades earlier, not on battlefields, but in corporate boardrooms, in bustling shipyards, in quiet diplomatic corridors, and in opulent royal palaces. They were planted in fear, in ambition, and in the irresistible, intoxicating desire for dominance. For centuries, Britain had ruled the waves. The Royal Navy was the guardian of the largest empire the world had ever seen, an empire that spanned continents and oceans. The British believed they were untouchable, protected not by walls or borders, but by their unmatched, invincibly fleet. Then came Germany. In 1871, the German states unified under a single flag, and within just a few decades, this new nation transformed into an industrial powerhouse. It built factories, roads, and railways faster than any other nation in Europe. Its economy exploded. Its army became the envy and the fear of every monarch on the continent. And Germany did not hide its ambitions. It openly declared that it wanted its place in the sun, its own empire, its own global influence, its own seat at the table of great powers. For Britain, this rising power wasn't just a competitor. It was a shadow creeping across its own empire. The rivalry had begun, not with bullets, but with battleships. This is where the collision course was truly set. Germany, under the ambitious Kaiser Wilhelm II, began a massive project, building a navy capable of challenging Britain's centuries-old dominance of the seas. For Britain, this was not just a military threat. It was an insult. It was a direct challenge to the very heart of British identity and security. The response was immediate and overwhelming. For every new, modern battleship Germany launched, Britain vowed to build to. Every new piece of naval technology Germany introduced, Britain countered with something bigger, faster, or deadlier. This wasn't just an arms race. It was a public conversation, a message being sent in steel and steam. We will not be replaced. These massive battleships, the dreadnoughts, became floating symbols of national pride, monuments to industrial might and imperial power. But they were also anchors, dragging both nations and all of Europe closer and closer to conflict. Both sides convinced themselves that their security could only be found in superiority over the other. The more they built, the more they feared. And the more they feared, the more they built. Pride had become policy. While Britain and Germany glared at each other across the North Sea, the rest of Europe was busy weaving a complex and dangerous web. A web of alliances that would turn a single spark into a continental inferno. Germany tied its fate to the aging Austro-Hungarian Empire. In response, Britain, France, and Russia formed their own powerful bond, the Triple Entente. What began as a series of defensive agreements designed to provide protection slowly morphed into a trap. Now, a conflict between any two nations would almost certainly pull in six. A regional crisis in the Balkans, which had happened many times before, would now become a continental showdown. One assassination, one bullet, in a distant corner of the continent, would now threaten the entire structure of European peace. And yet, the leaders of Europe marched on, attending state dinners and royal weddings, pretending that this delicate balance, this peace, was permanent. They were wrong. The miscalculations that finally shattered that peace are stunning. Germany's leaders were convinced that Britain, a nation of shopkeepers, would never go to war over a continental dispute. They believed Britain would stand aside. Britain's leaders believed Germany, for all its posturing, would never risk its economic prosperity and its own growing empire in a major war. France was certain it could defeat Germany quickly with a swift, decisive offensive. Russia believed that simply mobilizing its massive army would be enough to scare Germany and Austria-Hungary into backing down. Every single nation believed the others would blink first. None of them did. When Austria-Hungary, seeking to punish Serbia for the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, made its move, Germany gave them a blank check of support, pushing them forward. When Germany activated its war plan, which required invading France through neutral Belgium, Britain could no longer look away. Europe was chained together, and when one link pulled, all the others were dragged along with it. The decisions made in those final, frantic days of July and August 1914 were rushed, emotional, and ultimately irreversible. The leaders spoke of honor, of duty, of national survival, but beneath those grand words lay a terrifying truth. They no longer controlled the machine they had spent decades building. The alliances, the armies, the mobilization schedules, and the war strategies they had so carefully created now controlled them. When the first German soldiers marched into Belgium, Britain's final line was crossed. The treaty guaranteeing Belgian neutrality, once seen by some as just a piece of paper, suddenly became a sacred commitment they felt they could not ignore. On August 4th, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. The two greatest industrial, financial, and naval powers in Europe were now locked in a fight to the death, a struggle that neither of them truly understood or had prepared for. What followed was beyond the worst nightmares of anyone alive. It was a war of trenches that swallowed men whole, of new industrial weapons that turned verdant battlefields into lifeless, lunar wastelands. An entire generation was lost to the mud, the machine guns, and the fire. The war that everyone believed would be over by Christmas became a grinding, 4-year nightmare of attrition. In the end, Germany, surrounded, blockaded, and utterly exhausted, collapsed. Britain, though victorious, was spiritually broken and financially bankrupted. It emerged from the war to find that the world it once knew had been forever changed. The old world of empires and kings had died in the trenches. Borders were redrawn across Europe and the Middle East. Revolutions ignited, toppling ancient dynasties. And from the ashes of this war to end all wars, new and even deadlier conflicts were already being born. This story matters today. It is not just history. It is a warning. Europe did not fall into war because its people were evil or because they actively wanted destruction. It fell because nations believed they perfectly understood their enemies, and they were profoundly wrong. It fell because national pride was valued more highly than compromise and peace. It fell because leaders convinced themselves that war, if it came, would be short, controlled, and decisive. They were catastrophically, tragically mistaken. Today, as new great powers rise and old rivalries re-emerge, the lessons of Britain and Germany in 1914 are not distant memories. They are a mirror that shows us exactly what happens when healthy competition turns into toxic obsession, when diplomacy gives way to arrogance, and when nations forget just how fragile peace truly is. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into the past insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories that explain our world. See you next time.